Welcome, welcome, welcome in everyone. Welcome to Care Concierge with CarePatrol, where education is the heart of everything we do. We appreciate you joining us today on what is a beautiful Monday after what was for some of us a rainy Sunday weekend end. We appreciate all of you being here today. I know it's probably a busy day back at work, and I value the time that you spend with us. I thank you for joining us. It is our continuation today of our September focus on mental health issues. Hello, Teresa. Thank you for speaking. We are continuing our focus on mental health, which is has been our focus throughout September. And as we get into October, I'm pleased to say, per your request and past evaluations, we're going to focus October on clinical topics delivered by clinicians, not by me. So if any of you are tired of my voice, as I am, then you'll be pleased to know we're adding 6 new voices in October discussing clinical topics on everything from wound care nursing to pharmacy for the aging to social work and other topics. Also, C.W. Merritt, our very own clinical officer, chief clinical officer, C.W. Merritt, a nurse with over 30 years experience, will introduce fall risk as a topic for us in October. And we have a couple more coming up as well. So we hope you'll join us then. But thank you for joining us today as Care Concierge continues our focus on mental health. Our topic is mental illness in the homeless population. And next week, as we end, or not next week, excuse me, on Friday of this week, the 30th, I believe, we will finish our mental health focus for September with the topic of suicide. Now, I recognize many of you as having been through many of these September seminars, and they have been difficult necessarily because of the topic, but I appreciate you joining us today. Let's get in, now that it seems that most of us are here, into some housekeeping, which is, excuse me, I went one up. Those of you who've been with us and those of you who are new will know that we are accredited by the Alabama Board of Social Work Examiners and by the Alabama Board of Nursing to create, credential, and offer you these contact hours. We are able to offer these to be considered live hours or face-to-face hours because we use an evaluation process that is password protected. We give the password out at about 12:45. And there's always someone who's kind enough to let me know I've let the time slip, and someone will remind me if I don't give it out. But rest assured, we'll give out the password towards the end of today's presentation. That will allow you to go to SurveyMonkey, which is our evaluation tool. And in order to receive a contact hour, in order to receive a certificate, you must do the evaluation. Those who are on by phone or are not able to see a screen, I'm going to read for you the evaluation link so that you can make note of it. It is https://www.surveymonkey.com/r/ these are all uppercase letters, SY, T as in Tom, T as in Tom, L, X, W. And in case you didn't have a chance to get that all down, I'll read it one more time for you. It's also posted in the chat room. And I want to remind everyone that you have the ability to unmute your mics during this discussion, and we welcome you to make comments or ask questions just participate in whatever way you'd like. And some of you enjoy the chat room, and I'm glad of that. If you can see it on your screen, I've posted this evaluation link, which I will read again, https://www.surveymonkey.com/r/all uppercase letters SY, T as in Tom, T as in Tom, L, X, W. And remember, this survey, this evaluation is password protected. We give the password out later today. You must do the evaluation to receive your certificate. Nurses, we will be loading your hours onto the ABNP website, which is to say the Alabama Board of Nursing Practitioners website, so that you will have credit for this hour. Social workers can load your own. You'll all receive a certificate. And let's get started. We're pretty much all here, letting some people in. Our topic again today is mental illness in the homeless population. And as always on our evaluation, we have 3 objectives. We ask you to be candid. We'd like to know how to improve, how to better deliver this information, and if we deliver the information as promised. Our first objective is to discuss the size and the beginnings of homelessness. Second objective is to demonstrate the relationship between mental illness and homelessness. And our third objective is to list some ways to combat mental illness in the homeless population. In a sense, combat homelessness. Now, I want to ask as we get started, those of you who are comfortable with the chat room, or certainly those of you who might want to unmic and join or start a discussion, I want to ask, how often do you encounter clients or patients who are seriously mentally ill? And as you mull that question, Candace Morrow says daily. What do you do, Candace?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I am a social worker at DaVita Dialysis, but not only do we have to worry about the patient's renal health, we have a lot of patients here who are under the care of mental health professionals. So we have bipolar patients, patients with schizophrenia, etc.
My goodness. Julia Hoskins says 2 to 3 times a week. So I'm kind of stunned by that, but there are bigger numbers coming. Ella Howard daily. Wow. Yeah. So Ella, what do you enjoy to do? Sarah, what do y'all do? You can unmic or you can chat. Either way is great, but I'm interested that you're encountering these folks. And I'm glad that we've hit on some topics this month that may apply to you. Hospice social worker, Sarah. Really? Medical social worker, Joya. VA Women's Health, daily. I work in acute care. We see them frequently. Wow. According to the American Psychiatric Association, 1 in 15 adults suffer depression every year. It's 16.6% of the world's population. Women, as you ladies know, are more likely to suffer from depression. In fact, 1/3 of you will have some depressive episode in your lifetime. Bipolar disorders affect 5.7 million adults, average age onset of 25 years. And 80 to 90% of those who have bipolar disorder have a relative who either had a serious depressive disorder or bipolar disorder. Schizophrenia affects 1% of the world's population, about 1.2% of the US. Anxiety disorders are the most common type of mental disorders. We've discussed that this month. Almost 30% of us in our adult lives will have some type of anxiety disorder. About 20% of us in America have a mental illness. 5.2% of American adults have a serious mental illness. And let me read these. Gail Thrasher, I used to encounter them pretty often when I worked in drug addiction and hospice. In both settings, we saw mental illness with the patient and also with family members. Social worker at Taylor Hardin Secure Med. Oh, Sarah, schizophrenia and antisocial personality disorders make up most of this population. We'll get to that. A 2015 assessment by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, discovered there were 564,708 people homeless any given night. At minimum, they believe that 25%, 140,000, were seriously mentally ill, and that 250,000, 45% of them, had some type of mental illness. And they recognized that there would be more people who were labeled homeless if this was an annual count, not a night or a snapshot in time. So they also discovered that the affective disorders, depression and bipolar, schizophrenia, Sarah, anxiety disorders, substance abuse are the most common in the homeless population. And by comparison, these are competing statistics, but another 2016 study found that only about 4.2% of US adults have a serious mental illness, so between 4 and 5. The National Institute of Health study, which started in 2007 and ended in the 1st of April of 2021, identified 39 scientific publications that had a total of 8,049 participants. And they discovered that the mean prevalence of any current mental disorder among the homeless population, among these articles, was estimated at 76.2%, 3/4. Alcohol use was 36.7, drug use 21.7, schizophrenia was 12.4, and major depression 12.6% of that population. Teresa says, in my experience as a medical social worker and now as an elderly and disabled Medicaid waiver LSW case manager, many of my clients go undiagnosed. Thank you for sharing, everyone. How often do you encounter clients, I'll ask you now, or patients who are homeless? Please share in the chat room, or again, if you wish, I'd love to have you unmute and discuss. How often do you encounter clients or patients who are homeless? Candace is rarely. In the 1970s, large numbers of people began to be released from psychiatric hospitals, the intent of which was to deinstitutionalize mental illness. But what really effectively happened was that they transinstitutionalized. In other words, they moved from psychiatric hospitals to local clinics and formed in the, as a group, sort of urban ghettos of psychiatric, patients. A 1972 study by the National Institute of Mental Health reported that the relationships between community mental health centers and public mental hospitals serving the same catchment area exist only at a relatively minimal level between the majority of the two types of organizations. In other words, they're not seeing the same folks. Ms. Langford Valinda says, in the acute care hospital setting, we are seeing them more frequently than in the past, quite frequently associated with mental health issues, and many homeless veterans as well, who likely have mental health issues. 1979, the Inspector General of the U.S. Department of Health, Education, and Welfare noted that the relationship between the community health centers and the public psychiatric hospitals was difficult at best and adversarial at worst. And then in the early 80s, as we continue to deinstitutionalize, more and more very sick people were living on the streets and in public shelters. A study at that time of 187 patients discharged from Metropolitan State Hospital in Massachusetts reported that 27% of those discharged, 27% of 187 had been homeless in the previous 6 months. And substance abuse and failure to take medication were major predictors of homelessness in that study. Among the homeless, they said 63% failed to take their medication, whereas people who had stable housing, only 18% had failed to take medication. Thus, increasing compliance with medication would significantly decrease homelessness among individuals with severe psychiatric disorders. Now, 69% of the homeless in another study, of a current study, in fact, of 389,000 people that they studied, were sheltered, living in emergency shelters or transitional housing. 31% were unsheltered, living on the streets or in abandoned buildings or in their car or in the park. And these estimates don't include the couch surfers who camp out on the sofas of families and friends and move every few days and have no permanent address. And if you'd like to read this, was actually somewhat more current than the others. It's from 2015, and I've left the link for you here with the HUD info. I found this quote, I liked it. It's kind of a vicious circle. You may be more likely to become homeless because of a mental illness. And if that does happen, the homelessness makes the symptoms and the experience of the mental illness much, much worse. So I wonder then, what would be the greatest contributing factor to the growing numbers of homelessness? What do y'all think? What would be the greatest contributing factor, Belinda, as you are seeing more people in the hospital? What would be the greatest contributing factor to that growing number, do you think? Anyone can answer, and I'll continue moving on. We see a number of drug users. That makes sense. Not enough resources.
Yeah, we have a lot of substance abuse in our hospital that kind of goes with our homeless population. The two kind of go hand in hand. They'll be in homeless shelters and burn bridges there due to continued use of substances. They may have warrants that cause them not to be able to live in, community housing type situations. So it's a circle of just frustrations and challenges. Same thing if it's truly a mental health diagnosis. If maybe they're schizophrenic, maybe they're not treated in the mental health system the way that they should. They're not taking their medications. Their behaviors get out of control. They get out on the, out, nobody will let them stay with them, and they can kind of get into some legal troubles without maybe police presence knowing what's going on. So it's a big circle with mental health and substance use and homelessness. It's hard to decipher which came first.
It is hard to decipher which came first. It's a little bit like the chicken and the egg. Who was just speaking? You could give this presentation. In fact, you just did, but I'll continue on with it.
It was just Belinda. I'm just kind of going over our experience. It's just hard. It's a hard circle to be in, and they come back frequently. We see them quite often in the hospital because they don't have anywhere else to go. And it's just unfortunate. We do all we can to get them the help that they need. There just aren't enough resources to go around.
That's right. Thank you. That was beautifully said. Thank you for joining and speaking. At any given time in America, there are more people with untreated psychiatric illness living on our streets than receiving care. Approximately 90,000 individuals with schizophrenia or manic depressive illness are in hospitals receiving treatment for their disease. So that means that the population of those not doing so is much, much higher. And the New York Times reported in Berkeley, California, that on any given night, there are 1,000 to 1,200 people sleeping on the streets. Half are deinstitutionalized mentally ill people. It's like a mental ward on the streets. It has been increasing since the 70s. In Roanoke, Virginia, the homeless population increased 363% over a 20-year span from 1987 to 2007, and 70% of those had been receiving mental health treatment. In Bangor, Maine, a shelter opened in 1987. 20 years later, it has 33 beds and 12 staff. Families are much less supportive and less involved in caregiving than ever before. Amen to that. Mental illness is a major contributor to homelessness, as Belinda so well stated. A 2008 survey by the U.S. Conference of Mayors of 25 cities asked for the 3 largest causes of homelessness. Mental illness was the 3rd largest cause for half of the cities. 12% of the cities mentioned homeless families, mental illness being the reason for homelessness. Now, as Belinda also alluded, the lack of treatment then makes these folks unable to live in shelters or in, certainly any sort of halfway type house. And so they're sort of relegated to life on the streets. 1 out of every 8, to your point, Belinda, maybe more for you, 1 out of every 8 ER visits is due to mental illness and substance use, and likely or could likely involve homelessness. And the reason, answer to the question, is that homelessness among the mentally ill is associated with fewer psychiatric beds. In 2006, now this was 16 years ago, y'all, F.E. Markowitz published data on 81 U.S. cities looking at correlations between decreasing availability of psychiatric hospital beds and increase in crime, arrest rates, and homelessness. And as expected, he found direct correlations. Study in Massachusetts and Ohio reported that 27% and 36%, respectively, of their discharges from mental hospitals in the state had become homeless within 6 months, a third. Study in New York found that 38% of their discharges had no known address 6 months later. Dumping patients out of hospitals saves the health system money, but it increases our overall cost as taxpayers by shifting care to a much more expensive and much more restrictive and inappropriate jail or prison sale. A 2001 University of Pennsylvania study examined 5,000 homeless people with mental illnesses in New York City, and they found homelessness cost taxpayers there, this is 21 years ago, cost taxpayers $40,500 a year for use of emergency rooms, psychiatric hospitals, shelters, and prisons. And the reason and part of what we've seen is that homelessness is now accepted. What began as psychiatric deinstitutionalization in the 70s, which was really dumping, remains. And we see these folks, but we don't see them anymore. And some of them hide from us. They live in the woods. They live on the outskirts. They live under bridges. And they only talk to themselves when no one else is listening. Sarah Hunt says, we are also seeing a lack of availability to outpatient mental health services, specifically with the geriatric population, which will cause these patients to end up in the ER for treatment. Thank you, Sarah. Of the homeless population in the US, of its size, do y'all think that that number of people is the same number of people who live in the city of Birmingham? Now, I know a lot of y'all don't live in the city of Birmingham, but you can guess. Do you think the city of Birmingham is more people or less people than the total population of homeless people in the US? I've asked that 5 ways. The size of the homeless population in the US is about the same as the population of the city of Birmingham, true or false? Less. I've asked it 5 ways, y'all. You can answer it any way you wish. My guess is Birmingham population is smaller than the homeless population. Amy, good guess. And you'll see something here. You may notice it later. I'll point it out. One study found that 28% of homeless people from previous psychiatric hospitalizations obtained food from garbage cans. Now, what does that have to do with the population? The population is that 28% of people. In this study, they found 250,000 homeless people. That's equivalent to Dayton, Ohio, Des Moines, Fort Lauderdale, et cetera. If we accept a higher number, 546,000, we're larger than the city of Birmingham. But if you look at Metro Birmingham, it's 1 million people. So we're both true and false. Gail says more. US population higher than population of Birmingham. The fact of the matter is that there are competing statistics about the size of the population. But whatever size you think Birmingham is, imagine that everybody in it is homeless. And that's the size of the problem. The 2007 survey said there were 744,000 homeless in the US. And they said among those, 1/3 were families. 1/4 of the homeless are said to be chronically homeless. And numerous studies report that at least 1/3 have a serious mental illness, mostly schizophrenia, mostly bipolar. And the percentage is higher among those who are chronically homeless of having mental illness than those not. My point I'm getting to in a belabored way, of 132 patients discharged from Columbus State Hospital, 36% became homeless in 6 months. We had 38% in New York. We had in Massachusetts, 26%. The 2005 Green Bay Gazette says living in shelters or on the streets is likely to be difficult, as one would imagine, even if your brain is working. But if you have schizophrenia or manic depressive illness, this would be a living hell. A 1988 survey studied 529 homeless folks and divided them into those who had been previously hospitalized for psychiatric disorders and those who had not. And the previously hospitalized people were 3 times more likely to obtain food from garbage cans and much more likely to use garbage cans as a primary food source. I'm trying to illustrate and bringing up this sort of the realities of being homeless. In New York, there were 949 homeless men interviewed regarding having been assaulted or injured. 12% were deemed to be psychotic, and the psychotic group was much more likely than the non-psychotic group to have been robbed, beaten, threatened, or injured. These are fractures and concussions. Gail Thrasher says, after they closed many of the mental hospitals, much of the mental health treatment was transferred to the prisons. People could get more help for mental health and drug addiction, if they were incarcerated. Deborah Lavender says some families are forced to detach from mentally ill family members in order for them to get help. That's so true, Deborah. In New York, the seriously mentally ill or easy marks, they receive some of them disability checks, they get mugged, and there's a hierarchy among the shelter of those who are mentally ill versus those who are not. Those who are mentally ill become outcast, the untouchables. Albert Blanchard, a homeless man who was schizophrenic and had a long history of homelessness, was set on fire in downtown Nashville. He was paranoid and couldn't stay in place for very long because he felt people were looking at him. In Tennessee, two young men came downtown with plans to rough up the people who spend their nights sleeping on downtown streets. And they killed Tara Cole by pushing her to a river as she slept. She'd been homeless for years. She was bipolar. In 1993, three men and a woman, ages 19 to 22, beat a homeless man to death with a baseball bat. Randall Townsend, the man they beat, had a severe mental illness and was living under a bridge. They hit him so hard they broke the bat, and then they dropped a boulder on his face. In 1989, three men savagely beat Van Mill. He was 110 pounds and he was a paranoid schizophrenic, and they threw him into a wading pond and jumped on him until they crushed his chest. And in 1988, Ella Starks, who was ill, mentally ill, and had been homeless for 10 years, was raped and stabbed repeatedly and died of asphyxiation when an umbrella was forced down her throat. And Belinda, to your point, a 1995 study of rape among women with schizophrenia reported it to be 22%. 2/3 of those had been raped multiple times. The 1989 study in Baltimore of homeless women found 1/3 of the women there had been raped. A 1988 report in San Francisco noted that women were being raped at an alarming rate, one woman having been raped 17 times. You may sometimes see homeless women who seem awfully bundled up for the weather, wearing numerous layers. They do this to protect themselves from rape and from HIV. 19% of the men who are psychiatrically ill and homeless are HIV positive. Belinda, the homeless often report their driver's license, social security cards, and of course, money are stolen upon arrival to the hospital. It is difficult for them to pay for the cost of replacement, but also if they are homeless, they don't have an address to send the new info.
Doesn't speak.
Go ahead. Oh, you're welcome to speak anytime. Studies show homelessness can be traumatic. This would be a pretty easy study, I would think. You might want to do this for your dissertation. Having ever been homeless and the time spent homeless can be related to higher levels of psychic distress. In general, homelessness leads to more encounters with the police and the courts. The rates of contact with the criminal justice system among homeless adults with severe symptoms are higher than housed adults with severe symptoms of a mental illness. Homeless adults with mental illness who experienced abuse or neglect in childhood are more likely to be arrested. In 2014, 21 studies were reviewed, and they discovered that the relationships between police contact, severe mental illness, and victimization among the homeless found a lifetime rate of victimization, and that population ranged from 74% to 87%. 15 studies found that the mentally ill homeless had a lifetime risk for arrest ranging between 63% and 90%. It's not surprising to realize that the death rate among the homeless is higher than the general population. How much higher by percentage do y'all suppose? Is it twice that rate? Is it 100 times that rate? How much higher is the death rate among the homeless than among you and I who are housed? I'll continue. 4 times, Keldon says. Thank you, Keldon. Good to see you. Homeless and suffering from a psychiatric illness have elevated rates of death from a variety of causes. The homeless have a 3 times higher risk of death. So you're close, Keldon. And the severely ill individuals have a 2.4 times higher risk of death during any year. In 1992, a study in England, Deborah, you were correct. A 1992 study in England collected for 18 months on 48 homeless men, or people, excuse me, who also were mentally ill, found that 3 of them had died from physical causes, illness, 1 had died in an accident, and 3 others had disappeared. And depending on the missing participants, the 18-month mortality rate was a minimum of 8% and a maximum of 15%. The one who died of an accident likely had impaired thinking due to their mental illness, and that was the cause for the accident. A 1990 study of homeless people published in the Hospital and Community Psychiatry Journal found 43% of the cases that they interviewed showed a marked disorganization that is indicative of mental illness that was coupled with poor problem-solving skills. Belinda, to your point, poor problem-solving skills does not help when you don't have a license or identity or check. What do you do in that case? And some of these folks are so mentally ill and so paranoid they won't accept help. Freezing to death in September during bitter weather, certainly of the homeless who are in colder climates than ours, is common, especially among those with schizophrenia and manic depressive illness. In 1993, on November 29th in Washington, D.C., Yetta Adams was found frozen to death on a bench across the street from the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Irony. Yetta Adams was schizophrenic and alcoholic. The secretary of HUD at that time, Henry Cisneros, saw a crowd outside of his office and went to investigate, and later said, Yetta Adams' death jarred me and all my colleagues at HUD, reminding us that our society is becoming an increasingly hostile environment for the homeless. And so now I want to ask, what might be the solution, y'all, to addressing mental illness in the homeless population? Does anyone have any ideas, or has anyone taken part in any sort of team effort, cross-disciplinary type approach with this topic? I'd love to hear if you have, and if you have any ideas for how we might address this problem of mental illness and the homeless. Love to see your answers if you care to share. And as you do, we'll move forward. If you could focus the effort on making an initial intervention actually robust enough to succeed, that would be better than sort of half treating people over and over and over again. This is the current Secretary of HUD, acting Secretary. The association between mental health problems and homelessness can potentially be interrupted if more attention is paid to the issues stemming from poor mental health, specifically substance abuse and victimization. By treating these two risk factors for persons with mental illness, we may in fact also be treating homelessness. Programs that provide stable housing can help to improve mental health outcomes and reduce the number of inpatient visits to psychiatric hospitals. And in 2015, a study concluded that services that will deliver social skills training and cognitive behavioral therapy, particularly relating to relationships and interpersonal relationships, is useful in helping people who are mentally ill and also homeless regain housing. And the CEU code word or password, it's a little early today, Belinda, I'll listen to what you have to say. We have a healthcare for the homeless clinic here that tries to help. We need more mental health facilities here to provide housing, counseling, and medication management. Gail Thrasher says, change policy so that the mentally ill with family can still get help for them. Open appropriate treatment centers for people with mental illness. Also deal with all the survival issues, housing, jobs, family relationships. Y'all hit it. And our CEU code word is unknown because the size of the problem you can see is unknown. I've read at least a dozen, governmental or nonprofit or, clinical papers in preparation for this CEU. And I put the data from them throughout this presentation. And you could see, Amy Harvey, I think wages for mental health professionals need to increase. Yes, especially here in Alabama. Community mental health centers that serve our most vulnerable people do not pay livable wages, from what I've been told. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Gail. Thank you, Belinda. As I was saying, I have read numerous papers and placed data on every slide, data that on each slide conflicts with the data on the previous slide. Percentages change, the numbers change, the guesstimates change. And the fact is that the size of the problem, and I think in some respects, the solution is unknown. Hence, our CEU code word for the day or password. Remember to get on the evaluation link. You must use the password. The password is all lowercase letters. It is unknown. UNKNOWN. Unknown is the code word password for today. Keldon Jones says we do need more group homes because some people can't be independent and more quality _ mental health. Finding and implementing models of care as they have done successfully in San Francisco and Los Angeles, which I think are really sort of the epicenter of homelessness. Finding and implementing innovative models of care such as street psychiatry, and the image on the slide is just that. It's a street psychiatrist, and really what that is someone who's integrating the primary care that the homeless may seek, or that they may find the homeless and provide, would also integrate with psychiatric care at that time. The VA has a model that has been shown to work called HPACT. There's more information about it on the following slides. Utilizing allies in housing and rehabilitation services, to Keldon's point, a team-based approach is essential. The mental health care needs of the homeless are complex and include many aspects of the determinants of good mental health and well-being. And these teams would include you all, I would think, some of you anyway, those of you who are case managers and social workers, or a housing specialist, such as I am in a sense, or a vocational specialist, someone in therapy perhaps. The recovery models need to be, or have proven to be, successful in these cities by being holistic and patient-centered and trauma-informed. Now, y'all who've been with us know that we did a CEU at some point on trauma. And if you didn't see it, You can go to YouTube and then search Sean Barnes Care Patrol, and you can find our CEU on trauma. But we know that trauma is so important to health, physical health and mental health. We have to address communication barriers because without knowing it, we may carry a stigma or prejudice into that interaction without knowing that it exists. And this would mean, that we would want to, in advance, develop how we're going to address and communicate with this population. We see that the solutions should be tailored to fit the needs of each individual, including and most especially those who have families and women and children and dual diagnoses, which was the subject of our last CEU. Effective public policy can play a part in reducing homelessness. And that is to your point, again, Belinda, that mental health professionals should have increase in wages, that licensed professionals do not receive the salaries equivalent to their education and their abilities. We need to advocate for these. It's public policy that must change. Here on these tables is a synopsis of a mental health approach to the homeless population. And so I won't read all of these, but you will get these slides and they will be large enough, I hope, print for you to read. And if not, just email me, sbarnes@CarePatrol, and I'll send you the image. And we're just seeing them get more sick on the street the longer they stay there. This was an article from the Los Angeles Daily News in 2019. And that's where we are, y'all. They're getting more sick and they're growing in number and they're returning to homelessness even after they are hospitalized or receive treatment. And so I leave you today then with a problem, which is, what do we do about this issue? And that's it for the day. We finished early. Our CU code word is unknown. You can go to YouTube and see any of our past CEUs. You must do the evaluation. Please do it by 8 so I can get everyone else, their certificates by the end of the day. If I can get around to it and you can get around to it, it'd be great. Great presentation. Thank you, Belinda. Survey Monkey link for today. I'll read one more time for y'all. It is https://www.surveymonkey.com/r/ all uppercase letters SY, T as in Tom, T as in Tom, L, X, W. And if y'all will indulge me, those of you who wish to stay on, and I understand many probably already left, I'll tell you about my personal experience with homelessness. I have stood in a soup line more than once. You stand for 30 minutes to 45 minutes to an hour, and you talk to the people in the soup line with you. And then you get your peanut butter and jelly sandwich and your soup. Teresa, the password is all lowercase, unknown. So the thing about the soup line is you can get all you want to eat, but you can't get as much as you really want to eat. You can have seconds. And in order to eat, you have to listen to someone, usually from the church, who tries to convert you. And it doesn't matter if you tell them that you've already been saved when you were 12 at the Woodmont Baptist Church in Florence, Alabama. You see, when you're in the soup line and you're among that population, you're damaged in the eyes of the person who's trying to convert you, who gave you a sandwich. You can't make your own decision, even about your faith and salvation, because you're damaged, because you're homeless. And there's a wall between the person who intends to be helping and in fact is not, or not in the way they think. And, you know, I've been pushed out of a library where I was staying warm. I've been asked to stand in front of a different business on the street. I've had to change sides of the street because of people on the other side. I've slept by a railroad track, been run out of a public park, slept on the street, and eaten in soup lines and eaten out of the dumpster. And so I have empathy for people who are homeless. But the difference is, for me, that I was there in a sense because of privilege, because I could be, because I had a golden parachute. Yes, I was broke, and yes, I was homeless and living in the woods, but I didn't have to be. And a lot of them did. Most of them did. And that's the difference. But I've seen how people look at you when they think you're homeless. And it is different from what you might think. There is a nuanced prejudice in their eyes. You're not fully there. They don't really see you. Now, I was there again because of privilege, but I am adopted. And I just found out, well, I've just recently started talking to my half sister, who I found really through the Department of Human Resources 28 years ago, and then refound through 23andMe. She's 14 years younger than I am. And so while I had white privilege in my favor and male privilege in my favor and could live in the woods as if I were homeless, knowing I could go home, she, at age 14, my sister, 14 years younger than me, was applying for grants and housing and Medicaid for her mother and herself, because her mother, who's also my mother, was smoking crack and they were living in her car. I bring this point up to illustrate again the size and scope of the problem. You can count me, or you could count me in a snapshot 28 years, 30 years ago as homeless. You could count my sister as homeless at the same, 10 years later. We made it out, but we're the lucky ones. And I was lucky in the beginning. I made it out of nothing. I had privilege. She, on the other hand, is a remarkable person, in my opinion, who dug herself out of homelessness, even though her mother, my mother, was mentally ill and abusing crack. And so the homeless range across any number of folk. And I just want to bring that up to say that things aren't always what you think, and people aren't always who you think. And remember, when you, if you were like me, avert your eyes from the homeless, as I did, remember there's a person behind that. And thank you for listening today. I appreciate you all for listening to my little story, those of you who stayed. And I appreciate you for listening to our CEU today. Do join us on Friday when we address suicide. And then in all of October, we will address clinical topics delivered by clinicians. So looking forward to that. Thank you all for your